What's up, art family? Today I'm going to be drawing some circles for you. And what I want to emphasize here is that whenever you're practicing drawing anything, it really doesn't have to be perfect. It's just about getting the basics down by doing them over and over and over, detecting where your problem areas might be through that repetitive process. But also during this, you want to understand a lot of different broad general principles. So you might ask yourself, like, why would you just draw a ton of circles for seemingly no reason? You want to be drawing figures and robots and dragons and cars and all these amazing ideas you have in your head. You want to draw sexy pinups or you want to draw landscapes or whatever. But when it comes down to it, everything has a fundamental shape. And whether that shape is circular in nature or it is more hard-edged or squared off, you want to be practicing your basics, because not only will you practice filling up canvases, which is important, some people only draw in the middle or, run out of space or whatever, but you're training your muscle memory, which is how you actually execute on a lot of this. Now, oftentimes, if I'm cleaning up, I won't even freehand my circles anymore. I will just actually go and use the marquee tool, the elliptical marquee tool, hold shift, and just have a fill with option and delete on Mac. I don't know what the equivalent is on PC. Then I'll copy that layer by hitting Command J to duplicate it down here. And you can see that if I lock the layer transparency by hitting the question mark key and change the color of it, and then go to Command T to transform it, I can bring it down to 98% or so. And then I'll use the magic wand tool to select that one, making sure I'm on the duplicate layer. But then my selection will still apply if I go to the layer below. And lo and behold, I have a pretty perfect circle. So you can do it by hand or you can do it, digitally. And it really helps to have all of these techniques down when you're creating any given piece of art, because sometimes you want to go very quickly and freehand your circles and just get them into place, and then when you're cleaning up you want to use very measured, very precise lines. And even then you can hold Command, or I believe it's Control on Windows, to transform the bounding box of the circle and apply it to various perspectives by pulling on all of these different corners or all of the different aspects of the bounding box here. And that's really useful as well, because you can just go ahead and duplicate that for some really interesting effects. Just slowly scaling down every time. It's almost like 3D modeling. And I'm just duplicating the layer, making it smaller, moving it around. And as you can see, that's already very visually interesting to us, and you can go ahead and get creative once you understand how to actually utilize the tools that are available to you. And you could do this in pretty much any art program aside from, some of the super basic ones. You'll be able to apply transformations and copy and paste and make selections that are, more machined and more precise. So there's a lot of different ways to approach your circles, and you want to be able to make them very clean. You want to be able to make them very fast, very slow. You also want to be able to use them to construct things. So if we go ahead and start constructing figures out of the circles, I can, use these as placeholders to start to build a body, the shoulders, go down to the elbows, and then down to, well, it would be the knees if this wasn't a, more of a medium close-up, but maybe they'd be like right down there. And then you can begin to, get your basics down and just connect circles together and use those as placeholders for actual characters you want to draw in later with, more varied geometry. But circles and lines will get you very far when it comes to creating the drawings you want to make. And you also can use circles as compositional elements. If this is our focal point and it's just some sort of circle, I can have various lines that denote different camera angles or hills or something. And we're looking kind of down on it, which isn't as fun to look at, so I'm going to try that again. Maybe it's a big circle we're looking up at, like an egg in a nest, a giant nest, or maybe it's a huge dome home or something like that, where it's a half dome that's subdivided with these triangles and whatnot, which is helpful. So you can utilize the circle to be able to draw attention in the composition. So again, I'm not a super big fan of this composition, but it takes a couple tries, and sometimes it's helpful to do your compositions inside of a square. So if I give myself a square to work in, then it's a little bit easier to figure out where my compositional elements are going to be placed. I talk a lot about this in the beginner drawing course, a lot about shapes and circles and all of that. So I'll find where I want my circle to be, and then I'll try to draw various lines and intersections to find an interesting way to present that circle, and then I'll figure out what that circle will be in the actual composition that I'm making. So this one's seeming a little more interesting to me. It seems like something that I would be able to possibly add some finish to. As far as like a painting goes, I probably wouldn't, I don't really like to draw landscapes. I like to use big broad brush strokes for painting them. But it helps to sketch them in first, but I'm talking about in terms of finish. So I'm using a half circle here to create an interesting sort of dome home placed on top of a hill. Obviously, credit to Buckminster Fuller for inventing the geodesic dome, which is a wonderful bit of geometry. And basically, I'm now seeing a bunch of different dome homes kind of resting inside one another, kind of like we had those circles from earlier, like right here, I believe, when we copied and pasted all of those together. So they kind of like, are circles within circles within circles. You can have a similar idea playing out here, where it's domes within domes, and they're all subdivided with triangles or hexagons or whatever type of subdivision you want to use with your lines. But it's just the idea of creating compositions based on the circle. And we'll do one more composition based on circles, because it's always good when you're making your drawing exercises to do it more than once. And you see I got rid of a couple of them that I wasn't feeling, and that's something that I do very intuitively. If something starts off pretty poorly, I usually just like to restart. Again, kind of stuff I talk about in the beginner drawing course, or how to fix stuff if you've gone a little too far. So let's try again, and this time the circle could be obviously the sun, which is often represented by a circle. Could be a heads-up display, but all it is starting with that circle and then drawing various compositional elements around it to see if you can create an interesting idea. And the base of that idea should just be energy and motion and compositional elements that will help you bring about something that hopefully has some interest. So that's like the first iteration of the idea. I have a circle placed, roughly on the rule of thirds with some energy coming out of it. Could be somebody using like a power from far away or something. But again, we're a little far away, so maybe I'm going to use the circle very large and let it clip out of the canvas, after which we're going to have, somebody again, maybe utilizing some sort of power, whatever shape or whatever figure you want to place in the center of it, utilizing that power. That's sort of a stiff, kind of boring pose. Let's try something else. You can see how fast you can iterate once you get very good at gesture drawing and once you understand the basics. I'm not using circles to construct my figure, but I'm using the figure to denote the perspective inside of this circle, inside this focal area. I can do the same thing with squares within squares. It's just about understanding these basic aspects of geometry and then taking and applying them to compositional interest. So you're basically just having your shapes doing most of the heavy lifting for you, and then you can go back and clean stuff up once all the big shapes are in place. Oftentimes if you parse things when you're using reference or sketching or drawing in terms of big, medium, and small shapes, you'll have an easier time getting the big stuff right, and the medium and the small tends to fall into place. So circles are a great way to start off your shape journey. And this is a slightly more interesting pose. I'm not a massive fan of it, but I'm not going to bring any of these to a terrible degree of finish anyway. I'm just getting very picky because I know what I like and I know what poses I find cool. And it just helps to have the circle there. So this could be somebody powering up and just, there we go. That's a little bit better, kind of classic Dragon Ball Z style. Just emitting a bunch of energy, and I'll shoot some of it off the canvas because I know I can contain it later, or if I want to crop in. These are just ideas at this point, and it's all about getting your composition down and the rough idea of the pose or the proportions so that you can take it to a higher level of finish. And of course, I can use even more circles within this circle to denote other energies happening. So you could use circular shapes for energy and effects and magic, or you can use it for actual physical structures and geometry. Everything from liquids to solids to gases to light waves. Everything in between the circle can represent. So there's a lot of power in just the very basic fundamental things like a circle. So it's like, why would you practice drawing circles? And it's because it gives you greater artistic caliber in the broad sense. When you start with broad, true fundamentals and then start working down into more specific areas, that's when things get interesting. That's when you're able to do some very cool things. Like if I'm just going to go ahead and fill up an entire canvas with circles and practicing circles, I can do that until something abstract emerges as well. For example, circles can create depth of field. The thicker, heavier my lines are versus the smaller the circles are with thinner lines, it looks like things are closer versus farther away. So I could take all of this and crop it out, and then the composition feels very, kind of cloistered. So I just trust my intuition on that one, move it away. Maybe try something else where I'm not taking quite so big of a chunk out. And I actually kind of like this one right here because it could be casting a shadow on the surface of this one. And I'm just using circles to practice composition now. So I'm kind of killing two birds with one stone, if you forgive the kind of brutal and often cliche saying. It's essentially about getting these fundamentals down and trying to practice them in isolate and still finding interest in that. So much of my drawing journey has been this, and I don't regret it at all because I feel like I have much more of an ability to think abstractly, to think symbolically, and just to draw some freaking circles. So you really have to think about it in the broad sense when you're doing exercises like this, or when you're just practicing or playing around or letting your brain kind of shut down and work on various areas of your drawing. And when I mean shut down, I don't mean actually like, smooth brain, go numb, just do circles. What I mean is to actually just kind of unfocus and to let things happen naturally and then to derive meaning from that. That's also a great artistic skill, especially when your brain feels kind of tired after a day of work and all you can do is kind of move your body, and then you start to get the energy and momentum after that. So again, just practicing composition with circles. It's getting kind of messy when I see some of these areas. It kind of gets into like the dust territory, and if I wanted to do that, I would have to be more careful with where I place my very small shapes or my very small circles or marks. So that's another way of practicing, is just to do compositions and to think about circles. The last thing I'll say about circles is that they are really, really good for softer forms, so feminine forms. Maybe small kids have more circular features. So if I wanted to draw or sketch a lady, then I would use a fair amount of circles to get started. But of course, you have to understand a fair amount of anatomy, like I lay out in Simple Anatomy for Artists, in order to do some of the stuff like this. But you can start to use circles and lines pretty simplistically to figure out where all of your anatomical aspects of the figure are going to go, such as the bust, the hips, the torso, and you can start building from circles first and know that you'll have softer, more feminine forms rather than building with squares. Obviously I'm going more into cylinders now, which we can definitely have a video about later, but on the whole I've just been thinking a lot about circles and geometry lately, and various types of shapes and how they translate into drawing and into broader scale thinking as well. And again, that's something that I find very, very attractive about drawing, is that it allows you a different language of communication, and thus you're able to parse things differently and have newer discoveries that wouldn't come about if you were, writing about a circle or singing about a circle. But the circle is used so much academically because it has the ability to bring out a lot of our understanding, whether that understanding is intuitive or more academic, and it just allows you to find that flow. The circle is a very flowing shape. It flows symbolically back into itself, and there's points where you can break it for different effects. You could have like a space station or a magical glyph, and we've all seen it where there's various circles rotating within circles at various axes, and that's sort of like if you were to cut a hole in the center of a coin and various coins and have them spinning around one another. It's kind of like that. So circles are a great way to start thinking about your shapes and your geometry. Of course, the hips have a lot going on anatomically, and all of these things are just kind of oversimplified for the sake of being able to explain and kind of expound upon some of these concepts. But nonetheless, I find it very important to practice circles and also cylinders, as well as cubes and various other shapes, because it gives you the most amount of expression when it comes to the broadest sense of drawing. So I'm trying to use as many circles as I can here when it comes to this, so that I can really drive the point home. But obviously, the more circles I use, the more round and pleasant and appealing the figure is going to look. So you can have kind of buns. If this were concept art, I'd try a bunch of different combinations of those buns, but I think I like these ones the best. Have the bangs coming in, which is more of like a square or a flat, but we're getting into other shapes now, so we're kind of losing the basis of the video, which is all about the humble circle and how it can serve you in so many ways as an artist. And you think like, oh, drawing this is going to be boring, and it's like kind of, but if you have your basic pursuit interest, or you don't have a lot of brain power left for the day, all of your efforts or your ideas have gone to your work, whether that is working retail or an office job or whatever it is, and you only have a little bit left, you can just draw some circles, or you can draw circles on your post-it notes, and eventually things will emerge that'll surprise you over time. So before I get too into my sketching here, I'm probably going to wrap the video up. Again, I'm Taylor Payton with thebeginnerdrawingcourse.com, and I hope this was useful for you in terms of understanding how very basic things can evolve into much more complex concepts, and that is something that is, to me, infinitely fascinating. Starting with the simple and building more and more into the complex as you work your way up the levels of skill that the infinite ladder of artistic ascent kind of permits you to access. So thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Take care and happy drawing.